Hey guys, it's me, Seren, back with another video. So this is going to be a review video for I'm going to say the audio portion of When I Get Home by Solange. I am planning on doing a separate review for the visuals, but that might take a while. If you guys know me, you know I like to sit with stuff for a while. This is actually an extremely quick turnaround. For a review, but I felt like I had a lot of I guess you could say analysis, critical analysis of the album that came to me really, really fast. So I was able to sort of get this review up. I think the visual aspect of the album is going to take a little bit more time. So this is going to be in the good, the bad, and the ugly format, but I'm already going to tell you there is no ugly and there is very, very, very little bad. It is majority good. I really enjoyed this album. I like this album a lot. It was released on, depending on where you were at, I feel like February 28th, which was the last day of Black History Month, but I think it dropped right at midnight. So technically it was March 1st, unless you're on the West Coast or unless you're on Central Time, which I believe Houston is on Central Time. It would have still been February 28th, but if you were on the East Coast, it would have been March 1st. So some people are saying it came out March 1st. Some people are saying February 28th. I'm leaning towards February 28th as the last day of Black History Month. That just seems like a very Solange, sort of thing to do. Drop an album on the last day of Black History Month. And I really loved this album. You guys know that I also really loved A Seat at the Table. You guys know that I love Solange. Anybody that knows me knows that I love Solange. I have loved Solange for years and years and years and years. Way before she even hit her stride in the way that she is now. I always really enjoyed. I always just felt like whatever that Solange is doing over there is really interesting. Everybody's looking at Beyonce, which is totally fine because Beyonce is extremely talented and an amazing fucking entertainer and performer. Everybody knows I stand Destiny's Child. But I would be like, what is that Solange doing over there? She's dressed up doing 60s Motown. Oh, my phone ding, sorry. So seeing her kind of come into her own with A Seat at the Table and now Home, When I Get Home, has just been really exciting for me as a fan. I felt like this album, I feel like Solange is very deliberately making shit that is not for everybody. On A Seat at the Table, when Master P had that interlude where he was like, if you don't understand my music, then you don't understand me, and so this is not for you. I feel like that was almost the theme for this album specifically. I feel like this album is her sort of interpolation, her interpretation of Black culture, of Black American culture, of Houston culture, of Black American Houston culture, Southern culture, but it's in a really abstract way. But hence the title, When I Get Home. Again, I see Solange calling it Home for shorthand. I see a lot of people calling it Home for shorthand, which I thought was even really interesting. So hence the title being When I Get Home, or the title being Home. It's very centered around Houston, but not even necessarily present day Houston, but Houston as it exists in Solange's mind. Houston culture as it exists in her memories, And When I Get Home, I think it's not even just it is definitely the physical of when I get back to Houston, because there's a lot of emphasis put on actual physical structures in Houston, and also stuff that means a lot to Solange, her old dance studio and stuff like that. But I think that there's also more of a figurative meaning to the idea of when I get home, sort of going back mentally to the space that Solange was in as a child. She talks a lot about, even when it opens up, when I was a little girl, I grew up, I had dreams. So even getting back to this space of childhood, I've watched Christopher Robin recently, which I know sounds random. So I've had a lot of thoughts about childhood and imagination on my brain, because those are some major themes in that movie of how adults sort of outgrow, if you will, are encouraged to outgrow imagination. And so even with this album, I feel like there's a lot of wanting to figuratively return to a home sort of space and also physically kind of reconnect with Houston, and to just sort of explore her memories, and her memories of growing up in Houston, her memories of being a child, her memories of being a creative child, a dreaming, running with her imagination, and sort of how can I being Solange, how can she, I felt like a lot of her artistic inspiration seemed to be like, how do I, again, like interpolate this, or I guess like manifest it. Like creating art is in a way a form of like manifestation, right, of your thoughts into a thing, writing or painting or, filming or whatever. And so she kind of like, how do I create almost like a audio visual experience of my memories in Houston? That was what I got from this. I know that sounds really abstract, and it is really abstract, and I really enjoyed that, personally. It's really abstract, it's really experimental. The song structure is really experimental. Solange is flirting with jazz very heavily. Like, I was listening to it, writing down my notes, like, this shit is a jazz album. Like, this might be a jazz album. And jazz also tends to take advantage of a more sort of scattered and experimental strong song structure, especially sort of like abstract jazz and experimental stuff, and with a lot of repetition of sounds, which Solange uses a lot of repetition of sounds, a lot of repetition of words, of hooks, of choruses, of verses. Jazz tends to take advantage of like a more scattered and experimental song structure, especially like abstract jazz, with a lot of repetition. And Solange used a lot of repetition on this album. There was a lot of repeating of lyrics, repeating of verses, repeating of choruses, repeating of like chords, certain chords, sounds and tones in songs, which I also thought was extremely interesting. I am going to talk about this a little bit more later, but I'm going to mention it now that Solange did a live stream, might have been either yesterday or the day before. I did not watch the whole entire thing. I only watched like a couple of minutes, and she did mention the repetition aspect of it, how she utilized the repetition element of it really specifically because of the power that lies in repetition, and of sort of repeating things and using that repetition as a way to sort of incur power. And I believe that something she said was like, on the first go around of like the things that I imagined, like I made them real, maybe I didn't believe it, but like on the second go around, maybe I believed it a little bit more. I'm paraphrasing exactly what she said, but like on the third go around, maybe I believed it a little bit more. The fourth go around, I believed it a little bit more. By the fifth, sixth, seventh, like I really believed it. So her use of repetition was extremely deliberate, and it's something that really stood out to me again while I was listening to this album, and sort of gathering my thoughts on it. So it was also really interesting to see that confirmed during the live stream. I also did see her mention during the live stream that she also somewhat considered it to be a jazz album, which I thought was really funny, that she said that, and that she had like a lot of really heavy jazz influences that she was working with while she was putting the album together. And I feel like that really comes across. With A Seat at the Table, it comes across too, but with this one, like it's flirting with jazz, very heavy. Like it might be a jazz album, so it was also really cool for me to hear her say that as well. But it's not like strictly, a jazz album. There's a lot of funk elements. There's a lot of sort of Prince-inspired Minneapolis sound. There's some gospel tinge to it. There's a lot of organ sounds. There's a lot of keyboard sounds. And I know for a fact that like Solange and Beyonce and like Destiny's Child used to put at least one gospel song on every single one of their albums. Normally towards the end, like one of the last songs would be like a gospel song. They always used to like incorporate a lot of like gospel music into their stuff. And so it's really interesting as someone that is familiar with the church. You guys have heard me talk about how my grandmother, who's from North Carolina, is a minister, and so I spent a lot of time in church. So there were some elements of, the use of the organ and the keyboard that were like really familiar to me. And as I'm listening to it, I'm thinking like a lot of this you're not gonna get if you haven't spent time in a Black American church. Some of this you're just not gonna get. A lot of this you will not get if you're not a Black American, if you're not a descendant of American chattel slavery, if you're not from the South. Again, like if you haven't spent time in the church. if you're not from Houston specifically, there's a lot of stuff. There's a song that's called like, or interlude. There's also a lot of playing around with like songs and interludes. I think it's like 19 tracks or 20 tracks, but it's only 40 to 45 minutes long. So there's a lot of playing around with like, this is a song, this is an interlude. This song, you know, has a track listing like it's a song, but it's only 2 minutes long. This other thing sort of like swoops in at the end and it's listed as an interlude and it's a minute and a half. There's a lot of like bleeding sounds into one another. The end of this song is the start of the next song and stuff like that, which was like the transitions. The transitions were extremely experimental, which I also really liked. I enjoyed it. And so there's a song or interlude that's called Not Screwed, which it's like, if you're not familiar with chopped and screwed music, if you're not familiar with that, if you're not familiar with chopped and screwed music that comes out of Houston, you might not know what that's talking about. You might not know what that title is referencing, you know? Like, there's a lot, again, like, Solange is making shit that is very deliberately not for everybody. All these noises and pings and dings, geez. There's also inclusion of a lot of audio from her home life and from her upbringing, which, you know, there has to be, like, a lot of, like, it's funny to think about, like, Solange, right? Because, you know, there has to be a lot of footage floating around of her as a child, audio footage, video footage, because, you know, there's also has to be a lot of footage of Beyonce. Like, Beyonce participated in pageants when she was younger, and then she got into Girls' Time, which eventually became Destiny's Child, and they were, like, you know, going around and participating in these music shows, and, like, Solange also used to, like, sing and dance backup for Destiny's Child, so there's all this audio recordings and video recordings and, you know, old VHS tapes, and I'm sure there's just, like, all this material almost laying around, which again is interesting when we start talking more about culture and sort of archiving and being able to go back and, you know, look at your sort of legacy and what does that mean for who you are now and where you are now. It seemed like that was also something that Solange was really, really thinking about, and that this was almost an archive, like an audio archive, and also a visual as well, with the visual aspect, the whole thing, that it's like an archive of her upbringing in Houston, sort of in like a music format, the album portion of it, like a musical photo album. That's what I kept thinking while listening to it. This is like a musical photo album. This is like an audio recalling of her memories growing up in Houston. And then, you know, you have this, her as a little kid, like, these niggas, you know, stuff like that. Which I really, really, really liked. It's very different from A Seat at the Table, completely. It is nowhere near the same conceptually. It was not the same in theory. It was not the same in practice. There's nothing about this album to me that is like A Seat at the Table at all. I think that A Seat at the Table was like magnum opus. Is that the phrase? Like magnum opus level work, like Michael Jackson Thriller level work. It's like a masterpiece, and it's extremely important piece of art in terms of sort of unpacking like some critical race theory and ideas. And so and we also know the headspace that Solange was in. She was grappling with the depression at that time, and she was trying to sort of find a way through it, and knowing that it was racial, right? Like race-based, from her feeling oppressed, you know, trying to work around that and heal and like work on this album and sort of use that. This album is not that. It is something totally different. It is its own, like I said, it's completely different. It's completely not comparable to A Seat at the Table in any way, shape, or form, in my opinion. I love that these are two completely separate and distinct bodies of work. Like, I love that. I think that that's awesome. I think that this sort of audio archive that she created is cool. Like, Houston culture, that shit's cool to me. Like, just again, like the headspace that I'm in right now in terms of sort of like archive work, cultural preservation work, legacy, you know, writing shit down and recording shit and narratives, Black American narratives, experiences, and being able to say, like, this is who I am, this is who we are, this is how I grew up, this is what I experienced, this is what I saw, this is where it was, you know. that's what this work feels like to me. And I really, really appreciate her doing this for Houston, because I'm sure there's people out there that also grew up in Houston that maybe are part of the same, demographic as Solange. Because, like I said, this is the type of album that you are not going to get a lot of it if you're not the same demographic as Solange. If you don't have some of the same identity groupings maybe as Solange. So I'm sure there's like a young like Black American girl that's from Houston, around the same age as Solange, or that grew up in the same neighborhoods doing the same things, that maybe listened to this and was like, it also felt like home to them, right? In sense of the title, home, and when I get home. And that's powerful. That's powerful in terms of art and creating something that people could really connect with and resonate with, and that they can feel, and I just think that's really exceptional. I think Solange is doing really exceptional work in terms of just her art, like her art and her critical like thought around art right now is amazing to me. Like, and this is like a very interactive performance art piece. It is performance art. Like, she has this audio element to it. The album drop. She had the visual album that like also dropped, which is like totally something that has to be reviewed completely separately. Like, she has these live streams that are going, showcasing places where she grew up. She had the talk that was broadcast live, where she spoke on her inspirations and the sounds of the album. Like, she has the whole Black Planet thing, where she like bought Black Planet, or whatever the whole like Black Planet aspect of it is. I'm not 100% sure if she actually bought the site and is gonna like run it as social media, or if it's like strictly a part of this performance art piece, almost like a video installation, right, that she has going right now. Like, but even if she did buy it and she plans on like relaunching it as like social media, like even that would be fucking cool. Like, the whole, and I also like that I feel like her and Beyonce right now are sort of like building off each other a little bit. Like, the visual album drop aspect of it was similar to Lemonade, but Solange's stuff is way more experimental, way more interactive, and again, it just feels like really amazing, sort of interesting performance art, like where she's exploring this idea of memory, of memory, her memory, identity, her identity as someone Black, as someone American, as a Black American woman from Houston, and this like cowboy, this like yeehaw cowboy stuff, which is like really, really cool. And just being like, like, again, like another snippet of what I did see. I really only watched this live stream for like 5 minutes, but in this 5 minutes that I watched, like, she did touch on a lot. Something else she mentioned was like, I can remember, going other places and telling people that we were from Houston, and they would ask if we rode horses to school, and being a part of me being like offended, like, no, we don't ride horses to school, but a part of me also knowing like maybe we don't ride them to school, but we do ride horses, and like, so what? What's the problem? So that's like a memory, right? And a memory of like something really specific to Solange, but something also a part of like the broader like culture of like the South and Texas. And that sort of Texas, the South, Houston, cowboy, as something that also belongs to her as a Black American woman, and how does that look in 2019 now that she's a grown-ass adult? And her interpretation of that is like bedazzled fringe and like sparkly cowboy hat and a top made out of cowboy hats and like a Vegas showgirl outfit with like cowboy boots. That could be like her 32-year-old 2019 interpolation of being asked as a child, do you ride horses to school? And that is fucking cool. Like, that's cool. Like, her exploration of memory and like culture and identity through this very distinctly like a Black American Houston, South, Southern lens. And it almost feels like ownership, like claiming ownership. Like, this is also like our narrative. This is also like my American narrative. I did a post about it on Instagram, and somebody had put like hashtag make cowboys Black again. Like, even when you start looking into the history of cowboys and like Buffalo Soldiers, what we see right now that in terms of like Westerns is like totally whitewashed. I did a review of The Magnificent Seven where I said part of what I loved about the cast was that it was actually a historically accurate cast, because you did have a lot of Black Americans that went west after the Civil War ended and sort of during and post Reconstruction, because they needed work. They were looking for jobs. So they went out west, right? There were a lot of what would now be considered Mexicans, indigenous, that went out west. Well, they were already there in Mexico, so for them it would be north, going up into California, and then actually going east, you know. There were a lot of Chinese Americans that participated in the building of the railroad. So when I'm watching Magnificent Seven and I see like a Mexican, a Black person, a Chinese person, an indigenous person, and like one white person, Chris Pratt. Okay, this is actually what it would have looked like. So watching Solange kind of even like reclaim this narrative, for herself and for Houston and for the Black people in Houston that ride horses and that are cowboys, and maybe they do ride cowboys to school. But then they also listen to Prince. They also listen to funk. They also are in church on Sundays, so they listen to gospel. They listen to organ music. They listen to keyboard music. They listen to trap music. They listen to chopped and screwed music. Well, it would have been called trap back then, but they listen to chopped and screwed music. They listen to R&B. There was a lot of, I'm going to get into some standout tracks and lyrics in a minute, but there was a lot of R&B and like heavy Aaliyah references and melodies. And I know Solange has said that she really enjoys Aaliyah as an inspiration, and there was a lot of like really heavy R&B and Aaliyah references and some like scattered like stuttering staccato type of beats that reminded me of like some Timbaland type beats. She worked with Pharrell, you know, so it was just a lot of like, these are the different parts of my memory of Houston, my memory of home as an adult, and me sort of constructing this archive of my memories of Houston, and like a love letter almost to Houston. And I loved that. Some other things, another thing that she said in her live stream was, she was like, a seat at the table was something I made for everybody. Like, I was working through things, I was trying to heal, I felt like there were a lot of people in that space, and like that was sort of the point of that album. She was like, but home, this is the last thing I saw before I turned it off. She was like, but home was for me. Home is the album for me. And I definitely feel like, again, that comes across. Like, she's making art for a very specific person. This was for Solange, and this was for people that can also stand in Solange's shoes and that have walked in Solange's shoes, right? All that stuff was really interesting. Again, it was really funny because I had all these notes written down from listening to the album, and then this like live stream came on. I watched the live stream for 5 minutes, and like I remember her saying home is for me, the stuff about jazz and the stuff about repetition. So some standout tracks and lyrics for me. Almita is probably my favorite song. It has like a very sort of hard-hitting trap sound, what we would now consider to be trap. But I don't really think this is a trap song. It's also not a chopped and screwed song, but it's very much like a Texas, like, bump type of song. I kind of want to call it swing, Texas swing. That might not be right. Anybody that knows, please let me know. But Almita, I really love. Like, it really had a knock. Y'all know I love shit that fucking knocks. I said the same thing about a lot of the tracks on the seat of the table. Like, it's the type of shit that knocks. You just be like, oh, while you listening to it, like, oh, shit. Like, Almita, I loved. My Skin, My Logo, I loved. That had sort of a funk, and especially like a Prince Minneapolis sound to it, but she has like Gucci Mane on it. Like, really, again, sort of mixing up influences into this sort of hodgepodge of cultural influence, which is also really funny because when we talk about like Black American culture, so much of it is regional. Like, so much of it is regional, and you can have so many different like regional influences. That again, it's really wild when people say like we don't have a culture. It's like we do have a culture, and actually that shit is motherfucking a lot. Like, and it varies from place to place. I loved Jared, which had a super R&B, super Aaliyah type of sound, and Jared just had like some really just truly beautiful melodies and vocal arrangements, like oh, you know, just like really up and down. Solange has also really figured out her voice. She can hit some high notes. She can hit some low notes. She has like a mini Ripperton type of tone that she can get into. She's not like a belter. She's not going to stand there and like belt out a power ballad. I've seen Solange live. I saw her in Portland, which is amazing. So she's not going to like belt out a power ballad, but she has definitely figured out the ins and outs of her voice and like where her range is. And she can like really sort of ride the wave of a beat and send her voice up and down in a really interesting way. So Jared, I really liked. Sound of Rain was another sort of R&B tinge. There was some Aaliyah in there. There was some Beyonce in that one. Sound of Rain, like swinging on my, which reminded me of a surfboard, riding on that wood, ride. Which again, I kind of like. Solange for a long time was like no, nothing Beyonce, nothing that sounds like Beyonce, nothing Beyonce inspired. But then you also have to consider like they are sisters that grew up in the same house and that grew up in the same area and that have a lot of the same influences. So like eliminating this like exploration of this sort of Black American Southern Gothic. And now we have this one that's kind of building a little bit more on contemporary Houston, more modern Southern ideals, and just sort of like building up these like building blocks of exploration of culture and you know, Black American identity as women from Houston. Black women from Houston is fucking, again, I keep saying it's cool because it really is cool to me, like the art that they are creating. Benz, I really liked. Ben sort of segued in the very beginning, especially back into the jazz and the heavy percussion with the way that it starts. I have a soft spot for percussion, for heavy percussion, being from DC, where we have go-go, which is regional, and it's heavy with drums and percussion. Like, I really like some percussion really always works for me, which is probably why I really enjoy jazz. The Ben's vocals also, a lot of the vocal arrangements reminded me of Kali Uchis. I was like, and now I want a Solange and Kali Uchis collab. Like, Kali Uchis has this really particular way of pronouncing her words a lot of the time. So when I hear Solange saying like, I just want to wake up on CP time, something about that really reminded me of Kali Uchis a lot, who's amazing. And if you've never heard of her, please go look up some of her stuff. She's amazing. Drunken Babble is amazing. That's like her very first mixtape. She has like a lot of really good stuff out there. Por Vida is really good. Lots of great material. Look her up. Stateflow was more R&B. Again, it sort of seemed like the R&B, the funk, the gospel, like organ music, the jazz, and the Houston, Texas chopped and screwed, but not. Because nothing on there is actually chopped and screwed. It's not. But like those 5 musical influences seem like they were really what was like circling around in Solange's brain while she was making this album. I really love the Nothing Without Intention interlude, which like, do nothing without intention. I love that line. I feel like that's really important. I was just talking to somebody the other day. I was like, you know, I have this pet peeve. I feel like people talk to me and they don't think first. They just say stuff. And I just be like, what? Like, no intention, like no thought, no nothing. So like, do nothing without intention. Like, resonated with me. Like, that was the one where she was like, all these bitch ass niggas, all these niggas be talking. Like, loved that. Again, Almita is probably my favorite track. Standout lyrics in Almita. These are Black owned things. Black faith still can't be washed away. I love that line. Like, brown skin, brown liquor, like, but again, really deconstructed, sorry, I put my hands on the desk and it moved, really deconstructed song structure, right? Very sing-songy, very repetitive. We just in here cooling around. We just in here cooling around. But like, that is being used in a really deliberate way, right? Like, we're going to deconstruct the elements of a song and we're just going to give you what we want. I really appreciated that. Again, it's music, but it's like, it's very performative. It's like right there on the cusp of like performance art and like installation. Weight of the Show has been stuck in my head for a week. Like there's something so like catchy about like, something so catchy about the melody and the lyrics and like this part, she's like the thing, like, and the last 37 to 35 seconds of Way to the Show are just like everything. I believe they're on an electric guitar and a keyboard with these like gun clicking sounds going. And it's just like repeating over and over again, like it's on a loop, like the musical tones are on a loop. It's just some really inspired sounds on this album. Like sonically, the shit is like inspired. There's a lot of really inspired stuff happening. Some of it reminds me of Anti by Rihanna, which was also playing around with sort of sonic forms in a really experimental way. It also had a lot of interludes. It also had a lot of sort of deconstructed sort of song structures with things like Goodnight Gotham and stuff like that. Anti was more harsh and industrial on purpose. Home has more of a warm and homey feeling on purpose, but I kind of feel like they're sort of almost like twin albums in a way, with this like exploration of like really experimental sounds, and just like sonically pushing what can we do with song structure. I literally find myself walking around being like, call me, even on the way to the show. Way to the show. Like, I love it. So that's all the good, right? And there's more. I could like wax poetic about this album for fucking ever, but I'm gonna like move on to like the little teeny tiny bit of what could be considered bad, but it's really not even bad. I did not super care for the live stream where she's explaining about the album, especially experimental art like this. I kind of enjoy it when artists leave it up to interpretation. Like I said, I caught a little bit of the live stream, like no more than 5 minutes before I turned it off, because I was just like, oh, this is like too much explanation. I personally don't, again, like artists explaining their art. I like mic drop art, like where you either get it or you don't. It is nice, but I also kind of feel like, and I've talked about this with other people as well, like right now we're in the era of like the behind the scenes. I mean, and I don't think this is ever going to go anywhere, just because like social media has like made it so that it's everywhere. We're in the era of like behind the scenes. Like, I don't even know if like Behind the Music or whatever the fucking show that used to come on MTV where they showed you like behind the filming of the music video. I don't even know if that comes on anymore, because like now you can just like, you can watch them film music videos like on Instagram Live. Like live on Instagram, you can watch them film it, and then like the music video comes out. It debuts on YouTube, you see it, you know? Movies have like fucking 10-minute trailers and like all this behind the scenes footage and all these like interviews and all this stuff sort of like accompanying the material, that I feel like we're definitely like in a time and a place where it's expected for you to like have these talks and these like explanations. And what she did say was like obviously interesting, and I love Solange's like personality. She's like extremely charismatic, but like I just feel like artists don't have to explain their art. That's just me. So I was a little bit like, oh, I'm not going to watch this. Like, I would have liked to watch it, maybe. And like I said, maybe I'll like go back if I can. I'm sure it's on YouTube or Tumblr somewhere. But I was like, oh, I don't want like all this explanation really while I'm like still listening to the album and absorbing it. It was a bit overwhelming for me. And I also feel like the second half of the album was a little bit stronger than the first. The songs just hit a little bit harder. The first 8 tracks are very slow, which is fine. And that's also something that reminded me of Anti while listening to it. There's a lot of slow songs. There are a lot of songs that probably won't get mainstream radio play. Like, they used to play Don't Touch My Hair on the radio. Like, a lot. They will probably play Almita on the radio. They'll probably play Almita on the radio. There's, like, a couple songs on here that they might play. But, like, there are a lot of songs that are just, like, again, really deconstructed, really slow. There's a lot of songs that's not gonna chart. There's a lot of songs that's not gonna get radio play. Like, but it's art. Like, Solange is making art. And even me saying like the second half of the album is a little bit stronger than the first. Like, I'm not saying that it's better. It's just like I said, the first 8 songs really just kind of like meander along as if we're just like wandering through Solange's mind, like looking at her memories. And the second half of the album, it's almost like we're walking to Houston, and then like in the second half of the album, we're there. We got there. Like, when I get home, like we got home, and now we're sort of experiencing her memories of Houston in a way. I know this sounds like really out there, but this is really how I felt listening to this album. And I even actually like, I kind of want her to push it like even more experimental, even more abstract, even less standard song structure, even more, you know, interaction, even more video installations, even more performance pieces, like even more, like more. I want more. which I think she will. I think she will. Like, I think this is really a jumping off point for her work. A Seat at the Table, as I said previously, was like definitely her hitting her stride, and now she's really moving around in her artistic practice, which is just dope to witness. And so I love this album. That's what I think of when I get home, the audio portion of it. I am going to do a separate review for the visuals. What did you guys think? I know I got this one out really, really fast, so you guys are lucky, because normally I'd be taking like 2-3 weeks, a month. Like, I'd be having to sit. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Let me know if you like this album, how you felt about it. There will be some links in the description box, including links to my A Seat at the Table review. Food for thought as always. See you guys next time. Peace.